So Amanda, as a parent of a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, I think I can confidently say 100% of parents of toddlers and preschoolers have had trouble at bedtime. What would an approach to bedtime look like for a toddler or preschooler to help your child work through those kinds of feelings or energy levels as we get closer to bedtime?
Yeah, so we definitely want the lead up to bedtime to be as calm as possible. So we'll always recommend that screens are, put away or shut down at least 2 hours before bedtime.
Okay, 2 hours, that's handy.
We don't want to have too much sort of mental stimulation going on. So, just creating a calm environment as much as possible. I mean, families are families, and sometimes one parent might be coming home in the middle of the lead up to bed, but that if as much as we can have the calmness, that's what we're aiming for, and predictability. So we want to have a situation where the child knows what's coming up next. So they know that after dinner it might be bath time and so on with their nighttime routine. And because these kinds of factors, the calmness, the predictability, that consistency just provides them that sense of security.
So I know my kids often struggle to go from playtime to bedtime routine time. What are some tips you can give parents in getting out of the play zone and into the bedtime zone?
Yes, it's so hard. And it happens at so many points throughout the day as well, doesn't it? Trying to get the kids to the dinner table for meals. It's such a big transition. And the bedtime one's so hard because they're so tired at that point as well. And it's very hard to stop whatever really fun activity you're doing and sort of start that nighttime routine. So I often would recommend for families to think about a nice transition activity. So that might be something that isn't as exciting as maybe what they're transitioning from, but it might be a bit calm and it might be something that is still a bit motivating for the child to do, and that might lead nicely into, say, going off to have a bath or however they might be kicking off their nighttime routine. So some good activities would be things like, colouring in or puzzles, just things that might be low stimulation, so nothing exciting, obviously nothing screen-based, but something that might require just some slower movements, but still be fun and motivating, because then I guess we really want them to be able to easily transition to the next step, and you don't want to have something too fun because then you're just going to have the same problem again. They're not going to want to transition away from the puzzle or whatever it might be. So just something that might be that sort of step down that will still be engaging but calm them, kind of serve a few purposes really.
And once we get into the bedtime routine, what are the typical activities that are appropriate in a bedtime routine for this age group?
Generally, we would be looking at transitioning into bath time. There might be some play, happening with bath time. And after that, then we're obviously going to be doing things like brushing out teeth, getting pajamas on. And that's a really good time for kids to kind of feel a bit independent. So you can kind of encourage them to have a go at doing a bit of it by themselves if they're up for that. If they're exhausted at the end of the day and that's going to be pushing it too far, that's fine. Just read your child and see what they're capable of. But getting the jammies on and then sitting down and having some time together as well. I think it's like such a nice opportunity if the parent's in the right frame of mind to sit down and spend some time with your child, and again, keeping it slow and calm, and maybe it's reading a book or doing some, really quiet talking together at that point in time, just to kind of get that mood down nice and calm for the bed. And then once you sort of said goodnight, it's sort of tucking the child in and just trying to exit the room nice and calmly and easily, and it not being sort of a big fanfare around it as well. So just allowing the child to sort of have that time by themselves.
Is it a good idea to verbalize some expectations around the routine? So reminders every night we only have 2 books, or reminder that once mummy or daddy tucks you in, we have 1 kiss and cuddle. Is it good to continually talk them through that as well and remind them?
Yeah, it's really helpful. And it can be something that gets spoken about earlier on as well. So it might be a conversation that, you feel like you need to have because you read one story to your child and then they keep asking for more and more and more. And so maybe earlier on in the evening you might explain, well, do you want to go and pick out the book that we're going to read tonight at bedtime? Go and pop that on your bed. We're just doing 1 book tonight. So go and pop that out and then, that'll be ready for us later on. And then again, you might reiterate that during the routine as it's happening as well. And if it's something like, wanting lots of kisses and cuddles and things like that, again, it might be just giving your child that feedback and also acknowledging what you think they might be experiencing. So, why might they be asking for lots of cuddles, or why might they be asking for more books? And there might be different reasons. They might be asking for more books because they're, avoiding it and they don't want to go to sleep immediately. Maybe they're wanting lots of cuddles because they're, maybe feeling a bit insecure.
Yeah,
so
had a bad day.
Had a bad day, want a bit of a cuddle. So it might, be acknowledging that back. Oh, I can see that you want to have lots of cuddles. I wish we could have heaps of cuddles, but remember we said only 1 cuddle tonight and, we can have lots of cuddles tomorrow morning. So, and really acknowledging and validating how they might be feeling. So, you must be feeling, you've had a really big day. You must be feeling really tired and maybe you're feeling a little bit, it's sad to see me walk out the door and that's okay, but let's have our cuddle and, I'll see you again in the morning. Yes. And not before.
And do you have any tips for when a child starts to play up in that routine? So, they've been brushing their teeth every night after bath, but suddenly brushing teeth is off limits. They won't want to brush their teeth, even though that's a regular part of their routine. How can parents get through that?
Yeah. And we do see that because this is that age group where they're getting more independent. So we will start to see them kind of pushing back a little bit.
Yes.
It is a time though where we do want to start to give a bit more control to our kids, right?
Yeah.
So while we don't want to give them open-ended, free reign over everything that they're doing, it could be a little sign that, oh, my child seems to be maybe wanting a bit more control or independence. Maybe I could start to give them the choice between, do you want to do bath first or teeth first?
Okay.
So sometimes giving that choice of 2 can be really helpful. Giving the child a little bit of a sense of control can actually help them sort of just feel a bit more empowered in that situation. And often that's what they're trying to achieve when they are starting to resist that little bit.
So my 4-year-old has recently been saying at bedtime, I'm scared, I don't want to be by myself. And we've never experienced that from her at bedtime before. So in my mind, I'm thinking, she's just being manipulative because she wants me to stay in the bedroom longer. But is that an example?
It totally can be. So it can also be testing the boundaries a little bit, but it definitely can be that experience of, having those emotions and not maybe knowing how to regulate them. They're just little, they're not that independent in terms of managing their feelings and knowing how to, communicate about them. And often we won't hear about it during the day because they're busy, they're so active, for all of those, developmental reasons. And then we do hear about it at night time. Often I kind of feel like if it's a huge problem or a really big worry, you probably would have heard about it earlier in the day. And I always kind of say to parents, you don't necessarily need to sit down and have that big conversation about the emotions and the worries at that point in time because that's just going to make bedtime more difficult. So, but yeah, it definitely can be, it can be a genuine concern that your child might have.
It's very easy to get frustrated as a parent when you see those behaviours, those emotions coming up at bedtime that you're not necessarily seeing during the day, and it all seems to come to a head at bedtime.
It does. And because I guess like even for adults, that moment when you go and lie down in bed, your, mind might start to wander a bit and it might just kind of go to some of the worries or something, not so positive that happened that day.
Yes.
And kids are the same. So often it's that really the only time that they're really alone and they have their thoughts. And that you might start to see some little worries coming out and some big feelings.
And is it helpful when you have grandma or granddad or babysitters that they're aware of the routines as well and that they keep that consistency going if you're not the one putting them down for bed?
Yeah, ideally. I don't know how often it happens, but it is really helpful because from the child's perspective, there can end up being too much change. So if the parents have gone out and now we've got a babysitter or a grandparent looking after them, and then we've got one aspect of change. My environment's different now. My parents aren't here. Someone else is looking after me. And then if that person does a whole different routine, that's a whole nother layer of change as well. And that can just become really unsettling for kids, especially at the end of the day when they're really tired and they're far less resilient. So if extra carers can be across the general routine, it is always helpful. It's not going to be the end of the world if,
one night,
once a month, grandma's putting the child down to bed and, she spends a bit longer in there doing stories, which is basically what used to happen in my house. It's not the end of the world. But I suppose in situations, if there are some kind of really clinical sleep problems, then it would be really important for it to be really regimented.
Earlier we were talking about consequences and teaching consequences for behaviour. Is the bedtime routine appropriate or not appropriate to be discussing consequences? So, if they're playing up, they don't want to brush teeth or they won't get out of the bath, can we introduce consequences like, well, then we can't have 2 stories, we can only have 1? Or is this an appropriate time to be doing that, or should we keep that to another time of the day?
I think it depends on the family and on the child and the situation. So in some situations, you might be able to do that and it might work okay. In other situations, applying a consequence at that point in the night when the child's already tired and they're already upset because now they haven't been allowed to, whatever it was, not brush their teeth or whatever. And now we're applying a consequence. It's probably going to make it harder for them to go to sleep.
Okay.
So if we're sort of saying, you can't have an extra story because you wouldn't brush your teeth before, there's probably a pretty big chance they'll get heightened. And then we're probably expecting too much for them to be able to calm down and fall asleep independently.
Okay.
So I would recommend applying consequences and look more on the side of rewards, but I'd be applying them the next morning.
Okay.
So things like, if you can go straight to sleep tonight, maybe you can choose a special breakfast to have, tomorrow morning from the special boxes of cereal we've got. So thinking about it in a positive light rather than sort of removing their privileges and things like that.